While millions of people are sitting in total silence, keeping their thoughts inside, and mentally exhausted because internal monologues overwhelm their brain, there's a massive group of people who just talk aloud. And according to neuroscience, their brains might actually be wired differently. Stay with me, because what I'm about to tell you will completely change how you see the vocal self-talkers in your life. Here's the thing nobody talks about. Talking to yourself out loud doesn't make you crazy. It doesn't mean you lack control, and it definitely doesn't mean something's wrong with you. But there is something fascinating happening in your brain that's completely different from the 60% of Americans who keep thoughts internalized. Let's start with the obvious question. Why do so many people speak so loud? Humans are verbal creatures. For thousands of years, speaking to a group meant survival. Your voice protected you from predators, helped you bond, kept you alive. And speaking, it's basically modern thinking with better audio. When someone speaks their thoughts, their brain releases dopamine, the focus hormone, the same chemical that helps you solve complex puzzles. Wild, right? Their brain literally tricks them into thinking these spoken words are coming from another person. But here's where it gets interesting. People who constantly talk to themselves often have what psychologists call external cognitive processing. Their reasoning isn't as strongly tied to being locked in their head. They're more expressive. They're more likely to say, I just need to hear this thought out loud to feel clarity. And there's actual research on this. A 2012 study found that people with high self-talk frequency showed way more visual search efficiency. Translation: they don't automatically lose their train of thought just because they're in a busy room. But wait, it gets weirder because what happens in the brain of a silent thinker during a task is legitimately concerning. You know that feeling when you're trying to find your lost keys, that frustration. That's cognitive load in your brain. Self-talkers get instant relief during these moments every time, every sentence. Constant microdoses of clarification and focus. It's highly effective. Studies using fMRI scans show that speaking out loud activates the same memory centers as reading and other highly retention-boosting activities. And here's the kicker. The vocalization is what makes it so powerful. You don't know if your thought is valid. That articulation keeps the logic flowing. It's auditory feedback loop, the most effective self-regulation schedule known to psychology. The same principle that makes therapy sessions so effective. The mechanism is eerily similar to other forms of emotional regulation. Your brain doesn't distinguish much between different sources of comfort. It just knows it wants clarity. People who don't talk to themselves, their auditory systems simply aren't triggered by internal dialogue. And this might be genetic. Research from the University of Wisconsin suggests that variations in cognitive processing styles can predict how much someone relies on spoken verbal cues. Think about that. Your complete inability to assemble IKEA furniture without talking might literally be in your DNA. But there's another layer. Self-talkers experience something called distancing, basking in objective perspective. When they face anxiety, they say, "You can." When they face failure, they lost. Notice the pronoun switch. People who only think in their heads are less likely to engage in this psychological distancing. They're more tangled in their own emotions. They don't use externalizing techniques to feel grounded. Their mental state is more internal, less dependent on hearing things completely spoken into existence. Now, before the comment section explodes, I'm not saying one way is better than the other, but I am saying there are legitimate psychological differences, and understanding them is fascinating. Here's something that sounds contradictory. Self-talkers often score higher on certain intelligence measures. They practice thinking deeply about complex logical puzzles, even if those puzzles are mundane chores requiring their brain's focus. So, why don't silent thinkers feel that same clarity for problems? It's about working memory. Everyone has a limited capacity for holding information in mind. Silent thinkers often direct that cognitive load toward different places: internal visualizations, abstract concepts, silent reflections, intuitive feelings. A 2017 study found that people with high self-talk frequency scored way higher in emotional regulation and control of anxiety. They're getting their emotional balance from words, sounds, vocal rhythms. Their brains are seeking the same control, focus, reassurance, stability. They're just finding it somewhere else. And let's be honest about something else. For some people, talking out loud to themselves is actually a defense mechanism. Maybe they felt lonely in childhood. Maybe they felt overwhelmed by chaotic environments. Maybe they're pushing back against the aggressive overthinking often tied to silent rumination. Maybe they just never understood why grown adults silently suffer with racing thoughts. Your vocalization might have a backstory, or maybe you just find it helpful. Both are valid. But here's the part that explains so much about why loud thinkers and silent thinkers sometimes can't understand each other. It comes down to how you process reality. Loud thinkers find clarity in audio. The spoken word, the vocal tone, the rhythm, the acoustics. It's compelling because it's tangible, real-life processing with genuine sound. People who only think silently often find that chatter unnecessary. They think, why would I verbally announce an idea I already know, spoken to a person who isn't there in a room that is completely totally empty? They're not wrong, but neither are loud thinkers. It's just two different approaches to the human need for order and logic. One group finds mental clarity in a silent meditation. The other finds it in a monologue, a conversation, a verbal debate, a spoken conclusion. Here's what researchers call internal cognition versus external engagement. Silent thinkers build quiet neural pathways with concepts and ideas. Loud thinkers prefer investing mental energy where there's actual vocalization, where their speech matters to the processing, where they're listeners, not just thinkers. Neither is superior. They're just different strategies for navigating the human experience. Psychologist Vygotsky, who studied cognitive development, found that private speech, those moments of vocalized thought, can be achieved through complex activities. For some, it's silent focus. For others, it's literally talking aloud. And here's what's really interesting. People who constantly talk to themselves often report feeling more present in their own tasks. They're not spending 3 hours every Sunday trapped inside their own mental fog. They're engaged in their reality. There's something loudly radical about that. So, what does all this mean? If you talk to yourself, you're not missing out on some fundamental human sanity. You're just different. Your brain's working memory, your processing instincts, your cognitive allocation, they're all calibrated differently. And that's perfectly okay. The next time someone asks, "Who are you talking to?" and you genuinely are just thinking aloud, remember you're not broken. You're not crazy. You're just using a different tool. One that might, just maybe, yield higher focus. If this resonated with you, you're probably going to love why overthinkers are actually processing information completely differently than everyone else, and why that might be your biggest advantage. Click one of these videos to find out why you think a little differently than the crowd.